So John's going to talk about a little bit here on, building a seasonal staffing plan, with site requirements. He touched on it a little bit, but go ahead, John, just kind of finish that off.
So when you're talking about your site requirements, the first thing that I do when I evaluate my sites is you have to understand the site you're determining. So again, is it a zero tolerance 24/7 or is it an 8 to 5 sort of office park with no weekends? And then you also need to be aware of your post-storm requirements. So for example, hospitals or distribution centers. Your hospitals, they're running 24/7, 365. You've got helipads, doctors areas that are going to clear out, patient areas that are going to clear out. In your distribution centers, you're going to have tractor trailers that are parked up against the building that need moved. Plus, you're going to have tractor trailers that need cleaned off, the tops to be cleaned off before they can leave the site usually. So again, it's knowing the in-storm requirements, the tolerance level, and then your post-storm requirements. All of that plays into all we're doing is we're trying to derive a staffing number. So then we're going to determine the equipment and the employee ratio. And then we're going to determine staffing based upon worst case scenario, and then always at a few for good measure. So if we come up and say that the site needs staff with 3 people, we're going to say, okay, well, we need to plan to have 4 people there or 5 people there. Again, the worst case says that we need 3, but we're going to plan for 4 or 5 because you have call offs, you have people that don't show up, and people get sick. Again, this is the wintertime, we're in the worst conditions. So you always want to throw in a few extra for good measure just to make sure that you're going to be able to cover. And again, this is all going and feeding back into the HR group. And you need to make sure that all of that is communicated, documented, and clearly transitioned over the HR side so that they know what they're looking for by site, by location. And once that all gets in, you hand it off to the HR guys.
Absolutely. So I'm going to flip through. I talked about the Google map, but some other elements of the seasonal staffing plan. John kind of talked about knowing your sites and planning for the worst case. So I'm going to let him kind of talk about ranking your staff and staffing for longer storms before I get into the recruiting piece.
So one of the things that we've always done in the past is we rank all of our staff based upon an A, B, C, and G rating. So for our A-level operators, those are your elite operators. They're the guys who have been with you for more than 1 year. They're the seasoned pros that are going to get the job done no matter what. They're the guys that you can rely on to step in and run a site if you have to. Those are your number 1 tier level 1 operators. And most of the time, that's going to be a very small group of people. And then from there, you go down into your B rating. So it's a guy that operates well, but maybe can't lead a site, does a decent job, but needs some guidance sometimes, and that sort of stuff. Your C-level operators are going to be, a person who's needs a lot of work. So like they may have come out of a trade school or something like that, and they've only have limited experience. So they're going to need a lot of coaching and that sort of stuff. And then your G-level operator is going to be, which we use is basically it's a green operator. Now, in my situation, I've always staffed anybody new who's come in and I've never seen them before, regardless of how many years experience is, they've always get ranked from day 1 as a G. And then after the first snowstorm, I'm constantly evaluating staff. So we may change them from, you can go from a G to an A in one storm or B. But then where this comes into play is you never put your C's and G's on the same site without an A-level person on site. So, for example, you don't want to dump someone who has very little experience onto a site that's technically challenging and leave them there by themselves as their C-level operator because they're going to struggle, they're going to fail, and you're not going to be successful. They're not going to be successful, and it plays away from your long-term retention. So you need to make sure that you understand like how I'm ranking them, and that plays into again the staffing. So like again, we're trying to match this across the board. So for sites that have multiple operators, we're trying to say, okay, well, there's only so many A's that can go around. So we want to make sure our A's are out where we need them, and then we're going to staff in the B's and C's behind them and our G's to fill in. And then the next challenge that you have is long-term staffing. So how do you deal with the storms, that last, 24, 36, 48 hours? How do you deal with it? So one of the ways through my 30 plus years of experience that I figured out is you do 5 off, 10-hour shifts. So what I do in that situation is you're going to staff so for every 2 machines, I'm going to bring in operator A and operator B. Operator A is going to run for 5 hours, and he's going to come out of the machine, and operator C is at the end of that second 5-hour shift, operator B is going to come out. He's had to work 10 hours, and he's going to be replaced by operator A. And then we're just going to keep cycling through. So basically, it's 10 hours on, 5 hours off. And that technically gives us a duration of running, being able to run indefinitely. At some point, obviously, we're going to have to swap them out. But again, the idea is to not ever go beyond a 10-hour shift with an individual. Now, again, you could bump it up in your company. You could take it maybe 6, 12, but you definitely don't want to go beyond the 12-hour window, because the more, once you pass 12 hours, the incident rate's going to go through the roof. So you want to try to minimize that. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to get through a duration, keeping everybody at their maximum efficiency. So through my years of experience, I found that the 10-hour mark is perfect. That's kind of what we've dialed in on. The other thing that you don't want to forget about is your shovelers. And you need a place for them to shelter and be able to get warm, because they're out in the elements. They're the ones that are exposed to it. And so, like, from my perspective, staffing for your shoveling crew is critical, because they're doing a critical part of the services that we're providing, but they're the ones that are actually out in the elements. They're not sitting on their butts in a warm cab with, you know, a radio and all that. They're actually out in the elements doing the work. So don't forget about them. And a shelter could be as simple as like a trailer that has a heater in it and some chairs, or anything that you can, just to get them out of the elements so they can do it. And on big sites, a lot of times I try to staff with 2 shoveling crews. So one crew goes out and does the round and cleans the sidewalks, and then they come back in, and then the next crew goes out, and you can kind of rotate through there. So again, all of this is playing into building that staffing plan, communicating it over to HR, and this is all designed for retention and also filling out those roles. And this is what then gets transferred over to your HR staff. So good, take back over, Evan. Next slide.
Awesome. So yeah, I'm going to hit the seasonal recruiting plan, and because of time, I will be kind of moving here, but do want to kind of get you as much info as I can. So number one, start with your returners. Just like sales, retention is much easier than recruiting new people. So number one is ask all your returners for referrals. And like I said earlier about a referral bonus, this is a good way to incentivize. So if if operator refers somebody and they work so many storms, then that person who refers them gets a bonus. And that's for every person that works. Building your candidate pool, obviously you want to look at those that are actively looking. So you can do that through job postings, Indeed, all the other sites. And then you can also do that through boosted Facebook posts, which are nice because you can geographically target them to certain areas. You can even put like a video with it of like, maybe your team working in the snow. And then during the interview process, you want to assess both. Actually, let me go back. Passive candidates, almost skipped on the most important things in here. So passive candidates are those who are not actively looking, but maybe open to it. So one tool that's really good to use is Indeed's resume database. I found a lot of operators off of that. That's where you can go through any resume on Indeed with, I can put in like, Pittsburgh, PA, if I'm in Pittsburgh, excavator, heavy equipment operator, and I can see people. I can filter by who's been active and reach out, and then they can reach back to me if they're interested, and you can find candidates that way. Same thing with heavy equipment operator schools, reaching out, building those partnerships, maybe doing something where you do some additional training in the off season to get them up to speed. Referrals we talked about are important. Also consider reaching out to your local heavy equipment operators union, see if there's a way you can partner with them to kind of have them refer you people on their out of work list. Sometimes they'll do that in exchange for maybe paying into those people's hourly benefits, because again, they want to keep people working. So think about that partnership too. Interview process, assessing skill and will. So skill is, like John said, can they run the equipment, making sure that they can do that, having them run it and, putting eyes on it, checking off the different functions. Can they lead people if they're foremen? Do they communicate well for the role? Do they do quality work in a safe way? And then assessing will they do what they say they're going to do? Will they be there when they promise to be called? And will they keep responding and showing up?